Not only are we getting a brand new DLC tomorrow, but we are getting a complete overhaul of Remnant 2 systems. They have massively reworked so many moving pieces of the game, and I am beyond excited to share them all with you. The changes are so massive, in fact, that I'm gonna have to split them up into 2 videos. This is the first of the 2, where I'm gonna go over the DLC, general fixes, trait balancing, class reworks, weapon changes, concoction changes, and consumable changes. In the second video, I will go over mutator changes, mod changes, amulet changes, ring changes, and relic changes. And I personally feel that I have a lot more to say about those. Regardless, let's not waste any more time. The brand new Archetype Invoker is releasing with the DLC. It's a skill-based archetype that will allow you to benefit your team, debuff enemies, and prove a valuable addition to any archetype combination. The storyline is automatically woven in new campaigns, but just like the first DLC, there's going to be a one-shot adventure mode where you can access everything it has to offer. Let's begin. Under Performance, added support for DLSS 3.7 and XeSS 1.3. These options are now available in the settings menu. For Quality of Life, added cross-platform friends invites and joining in-game, and added an FOV modifier to console versions of the game. I've seen pretty much every single console player ask for this under every single post ever, so fret not, console players, your time is finally here. For UI, fix an issue where sometimes when an item was unequipped, it could not be unequipped without closing the inventory. Fix an issue where tutorial pop-ups about downgrading was incorrect. Fix an issue where weapon tooltips would not display RPS information correctly. Fix an issue where the name of a spectator disappeared after a zone change. Fix an issue where UI would display at max size while in a down state. And fix an issue where rewards for defeating Annihilation would show up behind the credit screen if players skipped the final game cinematic. The dev stated that items were always being rewarded, however the UI toasts were hidden. For the player, adjusted melee window after exiting a ladder so it happens sooner. Increase the buffer window for melee after all forward evades, after ultra heavy neutral evades, after Omen Dash, and after Misty Step. They also increase the movement speed cap from 150% to 200%, which is nuts! The dev stated that it's a general quality of life cleanup, and buffering a melee attack out of any evade should feel much more responsive. Same for exiting a ladder. I'm still kinda hung up on the movement speed cap. For Bleed status effect, Bleed now properly halves healing when triage is active for the player. For the enemies, Bleeding now reduces empathy and regenerator effectiveness by 50%. I knew it wasn't affecting empathy, but I didn't know it wasn't affecting regenerator either. The dev stated, added counterplay to certain boss save fixes that work the same way they do against the player. Play smart! A major change for Slow, it enabled interactions with items that require status effects to proc and interact. It also does not count as an elemental status effect. Essentially, it's another added way to trigger items that are looking for status effects by making this one of our core statuses. Those 5 now being Bleed, Burning, Overloaded, Corroded, and Slow. For Exposed now increases incoming damage by 15% from all sources. This is now a static value in single and multiplayer. It's no longer variable based on the number of players in game. We're considering making Expose a multiplicative debuff, but wanted to see how this version performs at scale first. This is in reference to the amulet that can make enemies exposed, Birthright of the Lost. For Shooting Range, they increased the active infinite ammo and damage trigger volume. They also fixed the DPS meter from disappearing when certain damage values were reached. The biggest change added mod charges and skill charges to trigger volume, meaning you won't have to spam dodge roll back to the crystal every time you try something new out, which is absolutely incredible. The devs noted that casting mods that push you out of the trigger volume made it hard to get solid DPS numbers. You now have more room behind to move about and get pushed back, but some things like double concussive shot will still push you out. We left some room so you can easily reset the tracker. Time to test Big Bang DPS! For enemies. For roaming aberration spawns, the spawn rate has been increased on lower difficulties. The dev stated that they doubled the spawn rate on Survivor and increased it slightly less on all other difficulties, but Apocalypse still has a 50% chance. To clarify, Apocalypse still has the highest chance to spawn roaming aberrations. For the Fey Knights, fix an issue causing Fey Knights to teleport to their deaths. The devs state that they're fucking dumb. For traits, some small trait balancing and reworking here. Dark Pact was changed to Grey Health Conversion instead of reducing the Grey regeneration rate. They've also restructured Swiftness to contain Wayfarer, which I think is an incredible change, and they also combined Amplitude and Resonance. I definitely see Swiftness being a near auto include now. As mentioned earlier, Dark Pact has changed from reducing Grey Health regen to Grey Health conversion rate, and they said that they found the original design to be too niche. Changing it to conversion rate gives it more overall interactions, especially with many of the updated and new gear items, which we will go over in the next video. Glutton now increases the max value from 30 to 35%. Glutton, of course, increasing the use speed of consumables and relics. Handling sees its max value reduced from 40% to 30%. The devs noted that spread reduction was still a bit too high across the board, so we made a few adjustments to most related perks and items, handling included. Wayfarer, of course, is now removed, and it's combined with Swiftness. While we will all miss Wayfarer as a standalone trait, a new trait can be obtained in its place. Head back to the original reward location and grab it. Excited to see what that is. Resonance also has a new trait waiting in its place. Now we're going to move on to Archetypes, which see some pretty awesome overhauls. For Hunter's Prime perk, melee weak spot hits will also extend the skill duration. A few things have changed for Hunter's Focus as a skill. For one, there's a 0.75 second grace period when leaving the ADS. They've also removed the critical bonus. For marked enemies, it reduces the critical chance bonus from 15% to 10%. The devs state that Hunter critical chance with mark gives a steady advantage over every other archetype due to its multiplicative nature. The base amount was reduced and the bonus during Hunter's Focus was removed following the new addition of the grace period to help maintain uptime. Their total range and weak spot modifier keep them ahead of the pack as the go-to precision-based class. I for one think it's extremely healthy for the game, as Hunter has always outshined every other class for pure raw DPS. For Challenger, Rampage is going to see a reduced initial Rampage fire rate from 15% to 10%, and it will also have an adjusted melee window after Berserk activation. Activation? What the fuck? And we'll also see an adjusted melee window after Berserk activation, which is going to be sooner. As for the Challenger's damage perk, the all-critical chance has been reduced from 10% to 5%. The devs state the critical chance wasn't tapering off like the damage does. After reassessing the strength of 10% all-crit only being on Challenger, we reduced it to 5% but always enabled it for any range. Of course, damage is still going to taper off. For Rampage, it has been overperforming for quite a while. The fire rate reduction should smooth it out while allowing it to remain incredibly strong, capable of monster damage. For Medic, if we remember what happened last patch, nothing really changed, as for this patch, they fixed an issue causing Benevolence from working consistently, so still Medic, still good, with the coveted Ben Keratin smiley face. For the Handler, the armor of the Very Good Boy has been increased to 50% DR. Along with this, Companion Bleed no longer counts as a separate unique bleed, and fixed an issue preventing petting Very Good Boy while wearing Atonement Fold. Devs note that the dog is a bit stronger, and not being able to pet him is inexcusable, but we'll do better in the future. Gunslinger is very different. First of all, for its Prime perk, casting a skill while the ammo buff is active will properly refresh its duration. If you're using Quick Draw and you have 2 charges, if you use the first one and then the second one, you'll gain infinite ammo reserve for another extra 8 seconds. The bug for Quick Draw has been fixed as it no longer consumes excess skill cooldown. That's going to come in handy if Invoker is your Prime. The biggest change, however, is Sidewinder, as the duration has been increased from 12 to 60 seconds. The cooldown has been reduced from 80 seconds to 50 seconds, obtaining ammo reduces duration by 10 seconds, and it also has a reduced swap speed bonus from 50% to 35%. The devs state that Sidewinder has been the single most powerful skill in the entire game since launch. However, since it required a bit of skill and dexterity to play it perfectly, it ended up only being used by the top 0.01% of players. Additionally, it was generally only useful with single-shot weapons due to the short duration, which he's right. With this change, the hardcore players can still enjoy the swapper playstyle, and everyone else can utilize the excellent ADS movement speed buffs and still have plenty of time to utilize the free reloads. Sidewinder will not subtract duration if a swap does not grant ammo. So now Sidewinder has just an incredible array of different builds that it can fit into. I love it. For Summoner, for its Prime perk Ruthless, sacrificing enraged minions deals more damage based on their health. They've changed the Flyer Sacrifice projectiles from just skill to skill and explosive damage. They've reduced Flyer Sacrifice projectile damage to compensate for the 2 damage types. They also increased the armor of all 3 minions, the Hollow and the Flyer to 40% DR, and the Reaver to 50% DR. They've also fixed an issue that sometimes causes minions to despawn when using yellow doors. Devs note that in the previous build, Sacrifice causes minion explosions to deal more damage the lower their health was. This has been reversed, so you no longer risk losing them to normal damage. All minions are a bit tougher as well. This is just an outright buff, so that's great. I'm sure people are going to be up in arms with their favorite skills getting nerfed, but the nerfs are so minor and the buffs are so plentiful, so keep using what you love, and if you want to change it up, other playstyles are more viable now. For Alchemist, it's going to be pretty short, they just fixed an issue preventing proper cooldown behavior. They also noted that occasionally, vials could get stuck in their cooldown state, so not anymore. Engineer's going to be seeing some massive buffs as well. They've adjusted all turrets' base critical damage from 110% to 150%. They've increased armor of all turrets up to 50% DR. They reduced the movement speed cap of heavy carry modes as well, from 200% to 150%. For the perk Metalworker, they've reduced range and skill critical chance from 10% to 5%. For the Vulcan turret, they've increased turret mode damage from 0.4x to 0.5x of carry damage. For the Flamethrower, they increased the burn from 50 over 10 seconds to 150 over 10 seconds, so it sees a sizable buff. To balance that out, they also increased the ammo cost of turret mode for Flamethrower from 10 to 15. They also took away 1 expertise point and put it into 1 endurance point. The devs note that they fixed the critical damage discrepancy of turret damage compared to other sources. They're also potentially looking at allowing turrets to take some of the engineer's stats. For now, this should give a little more power. Archetype is seeing another very large overhaul. with its prime perk and its skills. Arcan's prime perk actually removed mod regeneration. Instead of increasing mod generation power after casting a mod, it will increase base mod regeneration. Essentially, at a base, you're going to be gaining 15 mod power a second, and after casting a mod, you're going to gain 30 mod power a second for the allotted time. The Spirit Within perk now removed reference to mod power refund over time, and the Power Leak perk now reduced base gain from 200 mod power to 100 mod power per weapon. Reality Rune gets a buff, where they added automatic mod regeneration while inside the dome. Chaos Gate is going to work quite differently as well. Instead of gaining an immediate damage buff, you'll quickly accrue stacks while standing inside of it, and lose stacks one by one outside of it. This is the same for taking damage as well now. They've also reduced the total damage buff from 50% to 35%. The prior two were notable, but this is extremely notable as well, as they reduced the bonus mod regeneration from 20% to 5%. Havoc form also sees a lot of changes, as they've increased the speed of entering and exiting Havoc form. Canceling Havoc form now refunds some skill cooldown. They've reduced the cost of Blink and Shield. They've increased the base movement speed. They've increased firing movement speed. They've enabled momentum to continue during Havoc End. And they've also sped up recovery of Havoc End so you can move and act faster. The devs note that Arcan has received some significant changes. The original Prime was generating far too much mod power compared to every other source, while the ticking mod regeneration was falling flat. We made some large changes to how the Arcan generates mod power now by drastically increasing the ticking rate and giving Reality Rune a lot more utility as well. Havoc also received quite a few changes, which now allows it to stay active longer, feel more responsive, and get back into the action quicker after canceling it, due to the skill cooldown refund mechanic. Chaos Gate is going to need the most testing, as Havoc form and Reality Rune are pretty straightforward. For Invader, Shark stacks are now properly removed when unequipping Archetype, which is good and balanced. They also fix an issue preventing stacks while sprinting with a heavy weapon. Wormhole getting a strange out-of-nowhere buff, but it fits. Using it now procs perfect dodge and evade bonuses. So, say you had Feedback Loop equipped, you could teleport to your enemy and then explode them with electricity. It's like a poor man's Havoc form Blink. They also fix an issue that caused clipping errors when interacting with ladders. The devs note that they do have some plans to give Invader some additional love in the future. For now, they fixed a couple bugs and made Wormhole trigger perfect dodge actions. This should open the skill up for more interesting combinations. Couldn't agree more. For Explorer, quite possibly the strongest change Remnant 2 has ever seen in its entire history. Your starting melee weapon will be changed to a shovel. The devs note that they're going to keep a close eye on this change, because if the shovel proves to be too powerful, they're going to take appropriate action. They also made sure to reinstate that it's a shovel, in case any of you forgot. For Ritualist, it seems that skill summon and mod summon damage weren't working with Ritualist damage perk, so now that's fixed. They've also reduced crit chance from 10% to 5%. For the Eruption skill, the base cooldown is increased from 30 to 40 seconds. They also added an interaction with Slow because it's a temporary status effect now. They also made it so Eruption no longer requires a line of sight to spread Vial. If you don't know, Vial is a prime perk, where if an enemy dies, it spreads all of its statuses to nearby enemies. For Miasma, and I can already hear the whining in the comments, but they reduced the base damage from 500 to 300. Before you go freaking out like you did with Resonance and Spectral Blade, it's healthy for the game, I promise. You don't need to be nuking the entire map every single time, plus, this skill is still going to be plenty powerful. Give it a shot. For Death Wish, they've actually increased the damage bonus from 35% to 50%, and it is now affected by skill duration bonuses. They also shifted the trait loadout, where they -1 to Endurance and +1 to Spirit, which makes sense. Dev stated that they're mostly smoothing out the rough edges here. Eruption gains a new interaction with Slow and properly spreads Vial. Miasma damage was reduced to bring it in line with other skills. Again, it was a little out of line. They also noted that Death Wish received a nice damage boost, and the goal was to make all 3 skills appealing choices instead of just one. What was that one skill? I don't need to say it again. Moving on to melee weapons. The Assassin's Dagger is now always going to deal weak spot damage from behind an enemy. Now you can truly cosplay as an assassin. They've removed the additional damage buff when attacking bleeding targets, and they've reduced the base damage from 41 to 35. The devs stated that they wanted this to feel a bit more assassin-ish. Give it a try. I will. World's Edge. Reduced abnormally high impact and stagger scaler, reduced base damage on wave, and reduced critical chance from 6% to 3%. The devs stated that the impact scaler was always meant to be 0.8, but it was set at 1.8, which made this already mega strong weapon even stronger. It is now fixed. The rest of the tweaks are to bring it more in line with other options. However, because of how it functions, it will always be a very desirable weapon. Can't really go wrong with one of the strongest melee weapons in the game. Spectral Blade. Fix an issue that prevented certain attacks from triggering Disengage Mutator. Stonebreaker. They reduced the impact scaler from 10% to 5%, and they removed double damage stacking on charge attacks. The devs stated that melee weapons with special charge attacks always dealt less damage on the physical part of the attack, except Stonebreaker. This has now been fixed. For Atom Splitter, they increased the weak spot modifier from 90% to 95%, they increased the critical chance from 5 to 6%, they increased the impact scalar from 6 to 7%, and they increased the projectile width of neutral backdash charge attacks. They note that it's just a slight buff all around to make this weapon more appealing. I think it's a great weapon. In an incredible change, Hero's Sword now takes, not a million stamina every time you swing it for your charge attack, and will also reduce the minimum stamina required to fire the projectile. The dev note stated that a cool weapon that was charging the player's extra stamina when it was not required. This is very true. You would have, 150 base stamina and get 3 swings out of it. This change should make it more appealing to fans of the original. For Huntress Spear, getting a buff. It adjusted the charge and release window to be earlier, so you can get it out quicker. They've also increased the weak spot modifier from 100% to 110%. They've also reduced critical chance from 6% to 5%. Minor nerf, but whatever. The devs noted that in a world with Krell Axe, a secondary option is appreciated. We made a few tweaks to give the Huntress Spear a bit more purpose and feel. Don't forget that it does corrosive damage now. For Smolder, they've slightly increased the burning damage from 150 to 200 over 5 seconds. The devs note that it's a small tweak to give it a bit more burnination, which I am unsure if that is a word. We are now getting into the meat of the video with all these absolutely nutty weapon changes. The devs stated while there are some very strong standard guns, those with swappable mods, a few are falling behind regarding burst damage, total damage potential, or even just their overall feel. These changes are to bring them closer and smooth out any rough edges that a few of them might have had. Starting with the repeater, the magazine size is increased from 15 to 20, and the fire rate is increased from 7.5 to 8.1. The devs note that it's an excellent firearm that often fell to the wayside when compared against some of the stronger options. It's a bit quicker with a bit more sustain. The MP40R increases reserves by 42, so it's an extra magazine. The devs note, more bullets. That is true. I wouldn't have guessed this in a million years, but the Silverback is getting a buff, increasing the cylinder capacity from 5 to 6, and the total ammo from 45 to 48. The devs note that even though back in the day some gunslingers often left one chamber clear for safety, we decided to remove all restraints. A little extra kick and a bit more total damage will come in handy. Don't shoot your eye out! Sure Shot sees a minor buff with an increased damage from 105 to 110, increased total ammo from 21 to 24, and increased reload speed. The devs note that it's a few minor tweaks to bring this weapon up to par. It's already decently strong, it just packs a bit more punch now. The Tech 22 gets an extra 2 magazines, increasing reserves by 60, and it increases reload speed. The devs note, of course, more bullets yet again, and a nice reload buff. The Service Pistol. Increased magazine size from 9 to 10, and increased reload speed. Some small quality of life changes. Can't complain. For the Western Classic, this weapon's going to see an increased reserve by 6, increased damage from 32 to 36, increased fire rate from 5 to 5.8, and increased reload speed. Devs note that it's a handful of changes to keep the Western Classic competitive. It was already a solid handgun with excellent burst, now it has a bit more of everything. Double Barrel sees reduced damage from 110 to 105, reduced fire rate from 2.3 to 2.25, slightly reduced the reload speed by about 5%, but increased the minimum falloff from 7 meters to 8 meters. The devs say that there's no major tunes outside of just bringing the double barrel more in line with its counterparts. Still packs a punch and gains a small range boost to compensate. For Rupture Cannon, increases the ideal range from 13 meters to 14 meters, reduced the fire rate from 3.1 to 2.75, reduced the recoil per shot, which is nice, reduced the spread when not moving, which is even nicer, increased the spread slightly when moving, but significantly increased the reload speed, which was arguably the worst part of the gun, was how sluggish it was to reload. The devs note to make Rupture Cannon stand out in a sea of incredible handguns, we increased the range and gave it a bonus for standing still. We also boosted the reload speed, recoil, and accuracy, the latter when standing still. The Bolt Driver is going to see a nice buff as well, increasing the fire rate from 3.5 to 3.65, and increasing the projectile speed from 12,000 to 15,000. The increased projectile speed makes this weapon more viable for longer range shots, and the fire range gives it a little more pep. Moving on to primaries. The Huntsmaster is going to see an increased reserve by +7, which is 1 magazine, and split fire and bolt action animations to allow faster shoot and move behavior. The devs state that this change allows the player to release ADS and move right after the fire completes. They're no longer locked out while performing the bolt action. I always felt this gun felt a bit slower than the Wrangler, so I'm definitely going to have to give it another shot. Speaking of the Wrangler, if you've been around the channel, you know it's my favorite weapon. And what did they do? They made it better. Increased reserves by 10 bullets. They reduced the horizontal recoil, They reduce the vertical recoil, and they increase recoil recovery rate. At the end of the day, more reserve ammo, better accuracy. Enjoy. Oh, I will. Pulse Rifle. Significantly reduced horizontal recoil and slightly increased vertical recoil. Devs state that the Pulse Rifle is already a solid weapon, and the accuracy was increased to help give it more of a unique flavor. Yet another buff, imagine that. For the Widowmaker, increased reload speed. Devs state that one of the main pain points with the Widowmaker was slow reload, so they sped it up a bit. A heavy hitter that may find its way into more builds. It will certainly do that with mine. The crossbow is getting a much needed buff where the damage is increasing from 115 to 120, the weak spot modifier is increasing from 110 to 115%, increased firing sequence speed, reduced time to ready so you can fire slightly sooner, and an increased reload speed. The devs noted that it was a underutilized weapon for a while. The overall damage boost and all-around handling increase give it new life. The Royal Bow sees an increased fire rate from 4.3 to 5.3, sees a reduced time to charge perfect shot, and an increased reload speed. Devs state to help separate each bow, the Royal Bow has become the speed shooter option. It's faster in almost every aspect. The Sparkfire sees slightly reduced fire rate from 1.4 to 1.3, and slightly reduced reload speed. The devs note that minor tweaks here as we want to keep the identity and power of the Sparkfire while bringing it more in line with other options. Moving on to unique guns. Hellfire, which is the only gun I still have yet to get, because everyone pretty much said it was just really bad. Like, ass. It sees a mod increase base damage from 155 to 175, and the mod increases fire DOT from 100 damage over 5 seconds to 250 damage over 10 seconds. Devs noted that they have some additional plans for Hellfire, but they first wanted to help separate some of the explosive shot style mods. They made the fire proc hit harder and increased the total burning damage. The Rune Pistol increased damage from 15 to 16, increased reload speed, reduced horizontal recoil, and the mod will now force auto reload on activate if any rounds are available. So not only is it going to get a bit more damage and accuracy boost, but it's going to get a quality of life buff when activating the mod. This should make for a more appealing burst option in the handgun slot, especially when more of a support role. Getting an automatic reload is so huge, and I think people are going to love the difference. Very similar buffs to the Corrupted Rune Pistol where it sees increased damage from 16 to 17, reduced horizontal recoil, and the mod will again force auto reload. For the Meridian. Fix an issue preventing Meridian from dealing damage over long distances. This is just a bug fix. For the Sorrow. Increased projectile speed from 12,000 to 13,500. Increased primary fall-off range from 18 meters to 19 meters, and reduced horizontal recoil. The devs noted that the simple quality of life tweaks to smooth out weapon performance and to make it more viable at slightly farther distances. For the Corrupted Sorrow. Increased projectile speed from 9,500 to 11,500. Increased fire rate from 2.3 to 2.6. Reduced horizontal recoil. Slightly reduced reload speed. And the mod has removed range scaling from mod damage. Now, for those who did not know, the mod was dumb OP. That shit melted bosses and you didn't even have to scale into damage. The devs stated that the speed and accuracy increases will help take down targets at farther range, but this is to fix the wild mod scaling that it was, scaling with. Corrupted Nebula. Thank you for this. Increased whisk speed from 800 to 1600. The nanobots were slow as shit, I think the devs are trying to say here, so it's gonna get to the target sooner. For Starshot. Increases reload speed, and the mod has reduced mod requirement from 630 to 420, so the devs state that you and your team are definitely gonna die. Good luck! For the Cube Gun. Increased projectile speed from 4,000 to 6,500, wow. Move the callback trigger earlier in the manual reload animation. No longer triggers reload behaviors when projectiles returning to weapon. And for the mod, fix an issue preventing some player projectiles from penetrating the cube. To clear it up, the devs note that the cube gun is quite powerful when you're in a situation that makes it hard to miss rounds, aka point blank. However, once one or two go flying off into the distance, you're at quite a disadvantage because, it's not auto-reloading. They made a few adjustments so that when you do lose a round or two, you can get them back faster. Huge. A lot is going on with the Corrupted Cube Gun, so it's slightly reducing the heat per shot from 0.2 seconds to 0.1975 seconds, reducing the wind-up time from 0.5 seconds to 0.35 seconds, increases the heat reduction rate from 0.45 to 0.5 per second, reduce the heat reduction decay from 0.1 to 0.05, reduce the secondary fall-off range from 40 meters to 35 meters, adjusted projectile hitbox for more accurate contact, which was my biggest complaint. The mod will now increase heat reduction from 15% to 20%, It will also increase heat reduction rate from 50% to 75%, and it will fix alignment to player instead of world space. So, if that was a lot for you to digest, the dev state, look, it's just better all around. Maybe too good, but it shoots cubes, and that's all that really matters. Hard to disagree there. For the Anguish, the gun that was buffed many times and now sees itself going back in the other way. Reduced base damage from 105 to 92. Reduced charge time to perfect shot, which is good. Reduces ideal range from 18 meters to 16 meters. The mod will now force auto-reload on activate if any rounds are available, which is great. The mod will, however, increase mod requirement from 500 to 915, which honestly makes a lot of sense. Will adjust low health damage boost curve. Added text regarding damage bonus to lower HP enemies. And fixed and proper scaling of explosive damage modifiers. Devs note that Anguish was clearly outperforming most guns in the game, and the goal here was to dial it back a bit, while making the charge shot more rewarding. The mod retains its damage bonus to weaker targets, while the inconsistent explosive damage scaling was fixed. Overall, it's a bit weaker, but it's still incredibly strong. I have to agree there. Sagittarius. A slight change. The mod has been refactored to allow stars to pulse damage in the entire AoE. The dev state it's much more viable for hitting grounded targets, because of course if they're in the AoE now it can't miss. However, you may find it trickier to deal with pesky flying enemies. Remember that you can still shoot your gun, I think is what they mean here. The Merciless has increased projectile speed from 5,000 to 7,500, that's ginormous. Greatly increased reload speed. Increased speed of reticle compression so it activates the bleed sooner. Reduced bleed damage from 250 to 200. And increase the mod cost from 315 to 500. The devs note that the projectile speed increase makes the gun feel more accurate at longer ranges, and the quicker reticle compression speed allows the bleed to take hold a bit earlier. Reload is a win for anyone that loves this weapon. The mod, however, was a bit too low cost for how much damage it was dealing. It was a necessary balance. A huge change for Corrupted Merciless. Not only is it getting a slight weak spot bonus damage from 100% to 105%, but instead of needing 3 weak spot hits in a row, you just need 3 weak spot hits before reloading to get a free reload. They also fixed an issue that caused incorrect interactions with extended magazine size. The devs state that it's a tricky weapon to balance specifically regarding the mod. No longer do you need to hit 3 weak spot hits in a row, but 3 weak spots before actually reloading. That means that Extender or Bandit as mutators can give you some leeway should you miss if you still get those 3 total weak spot hits in. They're going to keep a close eye on Corrupted Merciless and make adjustments when necessary. The Nightfall is going to see an increased projectile speed from 10,000 to 13,500. The damage is going to be reduced from 31 to 28, but the fire rate is going to increase from 4.35 to 5.25, which they state is an overall DPS increase. Total magazine capacity is increasing from 10 to 13, and the total ammo is increasing from 90 to 117. Devs note that while the base damage is lower, the fire rate is quicker. This is an overall DPS increase, and it's going to help make the gun feel more responsive. Twisted Arbalist. It's slight increased reload speed. The devs state it's just a simple quality of life update, but it feels nice. Corrupted Twisted Arbalist is going to lower reserves by 8, which is 1 magazine. The devs note that it was dealing too much total ammo damage when considering reserves, bounce, and explosions. Minor change to bring it in line. Deceit is seeing a lot of mod changes. The mod has added melee damage to ring swords and thrown swords, increased damage of single thrown swords from 100 to 125 each, reduced damage of charged thrown swords from 125 to 50, reduced proximity ring sword damage from 35 to 25, and added clarification text for charge melee fragment debuff. The devs note that while we have some additional plans for Deceit in the future, these changes were made to make the full loop gameplay more rewarding and to make melee mod regeneration and trigger options more available. I don't really use Deceit, I gotta be honest, but I'm excited to try it out. You guys probably know it a little better than I do. For the Corrupted Deceit, the mod's gonna add melee damage to the saw blade. It's the same changes the regular Deceit got. For the Monarch, the mod now properly scales with mod duration bonuses. The devs note that the king doesn't really need any more wins. I guess auto-aim is enough. For the Plasma Cutter, slightly reduced heat buildup per pulse and shot, increased weak spot modifier from 75% to 80%, lowered reserves by a whole magazine, which is of course 100, and added a slight heat decay delay after firing. Devs note that when comparing all weapons, Plasma Cutter was dealing over 40% more total damage due to its ramping nature and total amount of reserves, which is an astronomically high number. The change brings it to about 10% more total damage. The burst DPS and sustained DPS have not changed at all. They've also adjusted the heat buildup, so wearing microcompressor will allow a full magazine to be spent without overheating on the final shot, so there you go. The Savior is getting, honestly, a pretty major change. The base damage of the Savior is lowered from 72 to 50, They've increased the perfect charge modifier from 2.3x to 3.4x, which ends up being a little more damage than before. They've increased the overcharge modifier from 1.85x to 2.65x, which ends up being the same. They've increased the fire rate from 1.9 to 2.1. They've increased the reload speed. They've reduced reserves by 6, one magazine. And for the mod, they've removed weak spot and kill requirements for fragments. That essentially means that your shots are always going to fragment when your mod is active. The devs note that basic uncharged mash damage has been reduced but compensated for with the increase to perfect and overcharge modifiers. The total ammo damage was too high without investment. Reload speed and fire rate increases as a trade-off for losing some reserves. It's a highly rewarding weapon. You just have to, get good. And probably the most necessary nerf of the patch, Corrupted Savior. Reduce magazine size from 50 to 40. Reduce total ammo from 300 to 200. Slightly increased base fire rate. Reduce max fire rate at full mod power. Reduced horizontal recoil. Reduced vertical recoil, so there's some buffs in here. They've also increased reload speed. Added a new reticle for clarity. The mod is truly what sees the buffs, as they've reduced mod cost from 400 to 330 per charge. They've added an activate animation. They've increased fire speed by 300%. The mod will also now reload 20% primary ammo per charge consumed, and it also adds new reticle for clarity. The devs properly state that this bad boy came out of the gate super hot, heavily overperforming in most categories except mod. This is very true. In fact, I made a video just highlighting the mod because everybody was making videos about the primary fire. We wanted more back and forth between primary fire and the mod, so we made a few adjustments to make casting it more appealing. You can now build up the mod much quicker, fire it faster, and reload ammo back into the primary magazine based on charges spent. Another weapon we'll be keeping a close eye on for future adjustments. For Aphelion, it now has enabled full auto fire. Significantly increased the width of primary fire wave. Increased vertical thickness of wave. Adjusted VFX to better sync with hits. Increased primary fire projectile speed from 2,000 to 3,000. Removed almost all recoil on wave. Removed all aim assist on wave. And for the mod, increased collision size on orb. Reduced recovery on fire. Increased deactivation speed manual and post fire. Increased projectile speed from 350 to 850. And it now generates one primary ammo on fire. The devs summarize it by stating that this is basically an all quality of life. We made a handful of changes to really push Aphelion towards its intended purpose. It's an excellent crowd control weapon and it deals solid damage to single targets as well. Activating the mod generates one primary ammo instead of reloading from reserves. This allows the supernova to always be destroyed by the primary fire. And that's going to happen with Corrupted Aphelion too. I can't tell you how many times I completely forgot that I needed to reload and I just watched the mod slowly fly away. For Corrupted Aphelion, increase magazine size from 6 to 8, reduce total ammo from 48 to 40, increase primary fire projectile speed from 2,000 to 4,500, increase damage from 21 to 33, so 99 total damage instead of 63, reduce fire rate from 2.2 to 1.45, increase reload speed, reduce vertical and horizontal recoil, and increase vertical thickness of the wave. For the mod, reduce recovery on fire, increase deactivation speed manual and post fire, made the orb spread consistent, increased base explosion damage from 50 to 75, increased base explosion range from 1 meter to 1.25 meters, increased secondary explosion damage from 100 to 150, increased secondary explosion range from 2 meters to 2.75 meters, reduced fire damage from 350 to 200, increased mod cost from 850 to 1,000, increased projectile speed from 350 to 500, and of course, like I mentioned, generates one primary ammo on fire. The devs state that to better separate Corrupted Aphelion from the original, we retuned many of the values to give it more of a laser shotgun feel, which I fucking love. It hits harder and faster. More importantly, the mod has been overhauled. It's now much easier to exploit the chain reaction of Micronova, and the behavior of the orbs is much more consistent. Activating the mod also grants one primary ammo, just like regular Aphelion. For Alpha Omega, reduce windup time from 0.5 seconds to 0.25 seconds, reduce base damage from 15 to 14, which is a max of 23 to 21, slightly lowered the fire rate, increased the reload speed, greatly reduced horizontal recoil, reduced vertical recoil, fixed an issue causing lower damage when charge speed was greatly reduced, and for the mod, increased projectile speed from 4,000 to 10,000, and beta ray detonation is prioritized over reload. The devs note that faster windup makes Alpha Omega more responsive as soon as you start firing it. To compensate, base damage was slightly lowered, but total damage has been increased due to the windup and the faster reload. To make detonation of beta ray more fluid, it will always take priority over reloading if there's any to be detonated. That means that even if Alpha Omega is missing ammo in the magazine, detonation will always occur first. thus requiring a second button press for reloading. This also means that detonation can be done without forcing a reload when you don't want it. This is another one of those guns that I really didn't like the feel of, so I'm gonna have to return it and see how it is. People are gonna be excited about the Starkiller buffs that are coming in. Starkiller is gonna see reduced horizontal and vertical recoil, adjusted reticle to better represent actual accuracy, greatly reduced spread while stationary, but significantly increased spread while moving, greatly reduced vertical recoil when scoped, and for the mod, drastically increased fire speed, reduce the build-up time from 5 seconds to 4 seconds, increase damage from 250 by 200 to 375 by 250, rework behavior so it properly affects all non-boss enemies, forces auto-reload on activate if any rounds are available, shrunk reticle slightly for clarity, adjusted explosion VFX for a bit more punch, and adjusted explosion SFX for for added cool factor. The devs know that Starkiller, which was the particle accelerator in Remnant 1, has always been a fan favorite, but it wasn't performing up to par. The changes to the primary fire are for quality of life and feel. The changes to the mod, however, were made with the goal of returning Starkiller to its former glory. Or at least close, because it was pretty fucking crazy before. Don't fall asleep on me yet, we've got 2 more. For the Repulsor, it's going to have greatly increased reload speed, so that's kind of insane. Most of the changes come with the mod. The mod power cost reduces from 500 to 250. There is no longer a deactivation animation after firing the mod. The charges are no longer 3, it's only 1. And they fixed an issue preventing mod charge bar from displaying properly after use. The devs note that the reload speed was the biggest pain point for most players. The mod was changed to 1 charge, but it also builds much faster. The purpose of this change was to let you banish and return to the action more seamlessly. They've also enabled it to skip the mod deactivate upon firing banish for responsiveness. I personally loved Repulsor before, so if they say that it's going to feel better, hey, I'm game. The final gun getting reworked is Spore Bloom, where although it is a single-shot weapon, it has an increased fire rate from 1.55 to 1.95. They've reduced the secondary fall-off from 30 meters to 25 meters. The mod is going to have explosive damage removed, but the Cloud will apply haste to allies. For some reason, the Cloud DOT will also no longer deal friendly fire damage. The mod will, however, have reduced charges from 2 to 1. Devs state that, did this thing really need a buff? Who knows, but it feels more responsive, and the mod is more enticing to use. Let it rock! Wow, that was a mouthful. Before I move on to the final balance changes, I should probably touch up on all of these. Some people are going to be up in arms because their favorite class or weapon was adversely affected by this patch. Some people are going to argue that balance only matters in PvP games and not PvE. I wholeheartedly disagree. If certain interactions and weapons are underperforming, they have every right to be brought up to par with the rest of the game. That goes the same in the other direction. If certain interactions and weapons are overperforming, they need to be knocked down a notch. This is a game with more moving parts than most. There are countless builds that you can create to ensure the destruction of your enemies, and even if your favorite weapon or skill is slightly less stronger than before, I assure you that that shit is still going to slap. Not only will Hunters still feel powerful, not only will Corrupted Saviors still feel powerful, but every other weapon is gonna feel impactful, and classes will feel strong to wield. Like, just look at Explorer. You get a fucking shovel. Now that that's out of the way, let me wrap this up with a few more, dare I say, shocking changes. Concoctions are gonna be seeing some adjustments. These adjustments were made to provide the more interesting choices when weighing available options. Defensive options, such as Meat Shake and Mudtooth's Tonic, still give excellent survivability for the investment, although I am sad to say that they are slightly nerfed. Meat Shake has a reduced damage reduction bonus from 8% to 6.5%. Mudtooth's Tonic has a reduced flat health from 25 to 20. Mudtooth's Stew has a reduced flat stamina from 25 to 20. Root Water sees increased health regen from 0.75 to 1 health per second, which is huge. Sacred Lake Water has a reduced gray health conversion from 50% to 30%, but it increases gray health regeneration from 1 to 2, which is absolutely ginormous. Sanguine Vapor also receives a buff where it removes incoming damage penalty. As a trade-off, the lifesteal is reduced from 3.5% to 2% base damage dealt. Tranquility Font also sees a minor nerf from 25% to 20%. I don't know about you, but I quite literally always had Mudtooth's Tonic available, so now I'm gonna have to start looking at other options. Along with this, consumables have changed slightly as well. They state that a few minor adjustments wanted to bring Brightstone and Pipe Bomb power, but they actually nerfed them, so I don't quite understand that. Ammo boxes no longer cost 250 scrap, they cost 200, and injectors no longer cost 200, they cost 150. As mentioned, Brightstone has a reduced base explosion damage from 75 to 50. Mystery Jerky has a reduced duration from 30 to 15 seconds, but an increased conversion rate from 1 to 6.66. Aptly noted, very spooky. And then the pipe bomb has reduced bleed damage from 450 base to 250 base. So again, I don't really know what they were talking about with bringing them power, but simple minor changes. If you made it this far, please consider liking and subscribing, as I plan on making a whole lot of content covering Remnant 2 in its entirety. Keep an eye out for the second video, which will cover all Mutator, Amulet, Ring, and Relic changes. Thanks for watching.